Good morning, everybody. Happy yet more sunburn day. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Now, we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day. We want you to ask us your questions, get in the comments. We will answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on, like many others, on best wishes for Lilibet, Diana, Mountbatten, Windsor. It's amazing, isn't it, that she was named in such a way to ensure complete privacy and no press interest whatsoever. But something that might affect all our lives, far more than that, is inside the paper, namely the growing threat of a 2-week delay to the lifting of restrictions. Now, Jason, the PM promised us this would be June the 21st, which always seemed rather arbitrary, and it relied upon the virus knowing what the date was. But Sage and others have always said it's far better to have a point to a place in the data and say we open up then instead, when infections get to a certain rate or something. But these rumblings that we're seeing about a delay to this are getting louder and louder. It's been going on for a couple of weeks now. And Boris is making his decision next Monday. So what are the chances, do you think, that he's going to make it or we're going to make it?
I think the chance of actually getting a complete and total lifting all the restrictions is looking slimmer by the day. So some of them could be lifted, but we could still keep, for example, social distancing. I think that could probably stay in place. Face masks, I think they could stay in place. The big question is what happens to things like the hospitality industry and weddings. Now, they're obviously much more concerned. If you've got a big wedding planned, you were told June 21st that there'll be no limit on numbers, etc. That suddenly looks very awkward, and that's politically difficult for the Prime Minister because he, as you say, he's given the impression, though he actually never gave a cast iron commitment, that we would have what they'd be calling Freedom Day on June the 21st. So then along comes the Delta variant, as we now call the Indian one. We know from the research over the weekend, which was published, it's 40% more transmissible. We know that cases are rising very fast in some parts of the country, and therefore we're having to analyse all this data on the go. That's the difficult bit for them. But fresh information is coming in all the time, and they're looking at this and they're going, how does this square with our timetable?
Yeah. That's the trouble, isn't it? It's because he's set this date. He's got the same problem he's had all the way through, which is promising X is going to happen. And then when Y happens, he's got to find a way to try and move the two together. And it's not necessarily always possible. And like you say, that this Delta, the Indian variant, is 40% more infectious. There are cases and deaths are rising all over the world. In so many different locations, and for a government which got to power on a promise to control our borders, it seems strangely reluctant to keep ours open. Now, millions of people have been in and out this year, each of them carrying potentially a variant that could get around the vaccines. Does the government show any sign of actually closing the borders yet?
They've been reluctant to do this right from the beginning. It's one of the question marks about how they've handled this crisis is why they were so slow. Given we're an island, which is for once actually quite convenient when you're dealing with a pandemic, that they could have closed the borders much more strictly right from the beginning. And it kind of just ran contrary to kind of Boris Johnson's thinking. He kind of likes to see ourselves as a global nation. He talks a lot about global Britain. But there was a very strong case to putting in tougher restrictions. But what we've got at the moment is this traffic light system, which just seems very confusing and impractical. So, you have red list countries where you have to quarantine in a hotel at a cost of £1,750, I think it was last time I looked. Then you've got the amber countries where you have to possibly quarantine for 10 days at home. And then you've got the green ones, which seem to be diminishing by the day, where there's no restrictions. But, if you take Spain and Portugal, they're next to each other. There's nothing stopping you from kind of flying to one country, going to crossing the other and coming back again, and then kind of, coming in for a system like that. So the whole thing is riddled with loopholes and inconsistencies.
Yeah. Now, we were asking today whether you'd rather go to Blackpool or Barbados this year. Leonie's just said she's had her holiday cancelled to Barbados. Sorry for raising that and triggering you, Leonie. Margaret would rather go to Barbados, but not at this particular moment. Les says Blackpool. I don't know what Mike said there, but it was longer. So if we could bring Mike ones back again, I can actually read it out. Emma says Blackpool. So this is the thing. Some people all right, they would love to go to Barbados, but there is a pandemic on. Now, Mike says, Johnson will, as he always does, wait until the last possible minute to deliver any bad news. He's only ever quickly out of the traps with the good news. I keep asking you your questions. What do you think Boris Johnson is going to be doing or not doing? It's interesting, Jason. I looked up where we were this time last year. Now, we had 5,000 more cases of COVID confirmed. There was 154 people admitted to hospital. 932 people in hospital at the moment with coronavirus in the UK. It might have been England, actually, and 4 deaths. But this time last year, we had 7,400 people in hospital. We had 359 deaths on June the 3rd last year. We're so much better than last time. It's not surprising people think we're on the downswing. But as you just raised there, at the bottom of page 7, Labour is calling for this traffic light system, for the amber list to be scrapped, because people just don't get it. Same as traffic lights. They see amber and they think it means go. And why it's even there is beyond me. Why do you need to have a middling country that you can sort of go to but would rather you didn't? So they've got this list of countries, which, as far as I understand it, you can go to some countries with testing, which are the green countries.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to a list with more testing and quarantine at home, which is the amber list.
Yep.
And you have a list of countries you can go to, but you shouldn't, and they don't want you to, but you can still come back afterwards with tests and quarantine in a hotel, which is the red countries. If they're going to let everybody in now, what's the point in having a red list? What's the point of any of it? Why don't they just scrap the whole thing? Because it's not working, is it?
And then it gets even more confusing, because you've got countries like France, which last week said, you're more than welcome to come here on holiday now. And yet the government's saying you can't go on holiday to France. So some people are just going to say, well, I'm going to go anyway. Why not? I can do the 10 days quarantine. What the downside is, of course, people who are told like the case of Portugal, they're told they could go there. They book their holidays, and then they're suddenly told, well, you've now got to quarantine on your return for 10 days. Now, in some jobs, that's possible if you're working from home, but other jobs, it's just totally impossible, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. And that's kind of why people are getting cross and confused, and why we're seeing these scenes at kind of the airports in Portugal. It's kind of rush to get back to try and beat the quarantine line. So you can see why it's causing a lot of frustration.
Yes,
in terms of the
expense as well.
Yes, and expense. In terms of the coming quickly back to the June the 21st date, and the other problem here is it's got political. So while the Prime Minister may be forced by the science to impose restrictions, there's a big backlash brewing amongst a lot of the Tory backbenchers. So we've had this right from the beginning. The Tory kind of ones in denial about the extent of the danger posed by the virus, and now they're going, press ahead with Freedom Day regardless, even if cases are continuing to rise, and they start to rise exponentially. So it's not the decision may be not just based on the science; it could be based politically as well, which is not the best way to do these things for public health. Yeah,
the revelations about the let the bodies pile high comments was very much to do with pressure from the Tory backbenchers, the wingnuts, the headbangers, the hardliners, who's saying, we shouldn't be locking down. We should just keep it open, and however many people die is fine, whatever, because they don't mind if the NHS collapses. Presumably, those people, which is why they've voted for so many cuts over the years. Now, keep asking us your questions. Where are you going on holiday this year? I'm going to Bridlington. And lovely little cottage in the North York Moors, and going to go to Whitby and see Dracula and stuff, because who needs to queue for 10 hours to get in or out of anywhere? I don't care if John Lennon's playing or Elvis. I'm not queuing for 10 hours for it. What about you, Jason?
I'm going to walk the Yorkshire Way, which is from Ilkley to the Lake District.
That'll be very nice. I hope the weather's good for you.
Yeah, well, I don't really mind.
And you like hills, because there's going to be a lot of those.
It's a UK holiday, because I just thought there's no point even trying to book anywhere abroad.
No.
It's just, you don't know where you're going to be. And as we found out, poor people went to Portugal, they could suddenly cancel it, just like that. So I thought,
wherever you book right now, you've got to be prepared for the fact it's going to be A, crap, B, cancelled.
Yeah. But this is the problem. There's so many places in the UK are booked out already. That's a tough bit. If you've left it late, it's a tent, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
And even
no, well, I'm booking for next year already because there's no, we might as well get in there early as far as I can see. William's going to Glastonbury. Well, it's not open this year, I don't believe, William. Or there might be a bit of it. Has that been a 2-day thing or something? I'm not sure. I've never been to Glastonbury. Dreadful idea. Pooing in the field.
It's great that places like Blackpool are seeing a revival. Long time due.
Exactly, because the upside of all this and the staycation and a pandemic is on page 21 of the Mirror. And it is that deck chair wrangler jobs are new freely available in Blackpool. If you've lost your job, you're in Blackpool, go, you can now be in charge of some deck chairs. Now, a decade after they were shut down and they got rid of the deck chairs, don't need them, no one's holidaying Blackpool anymore, suddenly, bang, they're back on the promenade. And that's an upside, a positive that we can all take with us. And Jill says, why not scrap the traffic light system and say if you've had the vaccine, you're free to travel? Because, Jill, I think I'm right. This goes into the vaccine passport business, doesn't it, Jason? I think I'm right in saying that having the vaccine doesn't necessarily mean you're protected against all possible variants out there in the world. So there's that. And there's also the fact that you might still be able to transmit. And because even if you had the vaccine, you're not 100% protected. It's possible you could still get coronavirus and still bring it in. That's why they only want you to be going to countries with a lower infection rate, I think. Am I right, Jason?
I think so. I mean, but Tony Blair at the weekend was saying, that people who have double jabs, they should be allowed to travel. He thinks the risk is very low. And you can see the argument for it, but it does create this kind of two-tier society of those who can and those who can't. And that causes problems. And then you've got, just take into account, for example, families where, the parents may be both double jabbed, but the children aren't, or pregnant women who are not allowed to get jabbed because it's against medical advice. What do they do? So you can see the difficulty of introducing any sort of passport scheme domestically or internationally, because but it will be discriminatory whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and they don't. They're not very good at doing simple things. So doing complicated things is going to be quite difficult. Julie's bought a recreational vehicle last year. Woohoo! She can go anywhere she wants. Best thing you ever bought. I had one for a press trip. I had the loan of one for a week, and it was fantastic. I would love to have one, but I don't have, the many thousands of pounds necessary to buy one. Also, I crashed it, so there's that. And Laura said, would we rather go to Barbados or Blackpool? In the current situation, Blackpool, keep the UK going. Well done. Bit of patriotic holiday there. Well done. But on a similar topic, which is holidays and travel, and when all this hell is going to be over, it turns out that 80% of Brits want to jab the whole world. And I've been saying this for about 6 months now, but finally, Gordon Brown has agreed with me, backed what I've said, and said this isn't over until it's over everywhere. He reckons we can spend a few billion paying about 5% of the total cost of the world's vaccines. EU, USA paying 22%, 27%. That sounds like a good deal to me. And we will save trillions. The global economy will be £6 trillion better off this time next year if we just really push to get all 7 billion people on the planet as vaccinated as possible. Now, Jason, the G7 meet in Cornwall on Friday. There's lots of talks going on behind the scenes already about various things. And Boris has said he wants to do this. He wants to give our spare vaccines to the rest of the world. But he hasn't said how. He hasn't said where the money is. And it appears to have no real plan, which makes it about as likely as a garden bridge to the moon, to my mind. But the rest of the G7, are they going to come up with a plan for this and carry him along with them? What's going to happen?
Right. So first of all, G7 is the seven biggest kind of developed countries. So it's America, Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Canada, and Japan, and they meet once a year on a rotating basis. Each country gets to host this, and this year it's Boris Johnson's turn, and he's doing it down in Carbis Bay in Cornwall. Now, what's interesting here in terms of vaccinations is Joe Biden, who is kind of showing the good a US president can do after the horror years of Trump, has already pledged that America will hand over its excess vaccines. We're talking about 80 to 100 million of them. And so he's kind of shaming the other G7 leaders into doing the same. And as you say, Boris Johnson has said, yes, we are willing to do this. What he has yet to do are two things. one, to say how many excess vaccines we'll hand over, and two, to say when we will do this. So we've got a kind of vague, very kind of Johnson-esque commitment, which is actually a moment meaningless until he puts hard figures next to it.
Just like everything else, really. Any pledges he's made to anybody, including wives, poor Carrie. I hope you get a lot of things in your name. But there's also some issues with G7, isn't there, with what they're going to, how they're going to react to Boris Johnson on other things. We've got corporation tax, global limits on corporation tax they're trying to set, which Britain is kind of one of those countries holding out because we want them to tax the tech giants in the States better, or let us tax them. And you've also got this issue with foreign aid. Joe Biden is going to want people to make their share of foreign aid payments because that helps with the vaccines more than anything else as well. And yet we've already cut our foreign aid contribution, and Boris Johnson's facing a bit of a rebellion about it. So he's got pressure on all sides to do a variety of things, isn't
he? So again, the power of Biden is that at the weekend, Rishi Sunak and the other G7 finance ministers did agree to his plan for a kind of a base level corporation tax across the world. And Biden originally went for 21%. I mean, they hammered it down to 15%, but it's still a start. It's not as good as it could be. And it will obviously raise significantly less money in the UK. I mean, we're talking the difference between kind of raising 7 billion a year and raising 14 billion a year, which is a lot of money if you want to pay for schools and hospitals, for example, or even a new royal yacht.
He doesn't want to pay for schools and hospitals. He only wants to pay for a royal yacht. 99p for a kid at school.
Yeah. And then slightly embarrassing, we are the only G7 country which during the pandemic is cutting the amount of international aid we're going. So in his budget in March, Rishi Sunak, who obviously he looks a very nice guy and he smiles nicely for the cameras, but he's got a heart of steel, that guy. We were committed in the Tory manifesto, no less, to spending 0.7% of our gross national income on overseas development. Rishi Sunak just suddenly decides to abandon that commitment. And as a result, today in the Commons, it's not certain to happen, but because we've still got to see if the Speaker accepts it, there's a big Tory rebellion brewing, they could inflict Boris Johnson's first defeat since the general election. And the Tory rebels are quite an interesting bunch because they include former International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell, they include Theresa May, they include Jeremy Hunt, and also they include kind of some of the right-wingers like Edward Lee. So it's not all your usual suspects. And they're saying, look, we made this manifesto promise, we should stick to it. They're saying cutting aid during a pandemic will just increase the number of children in poverty. It will cause more deaths and more deprivation. And we want a commitment that you're not going to do this again. And it's obviously, this is quite embarrassing for the Prime Minister. As it happens, just 3 or 4 days before he goes to the G7 summit, where all the other world leaders are going to say, look, we need to do more to help the world's poorest.
Yes, exactly. Now, morning, Deb, one of our regulars. I understand this is one of the most normal comments you've made, and all capital letters, so that's handy. All foreign aid needs to stop. Let's tackle this issue, all right? Because foreign aid comes in 2 different chunks. One of it is for emergencies, okay? So if there's an earthquake or a tsunami, there is a chunk of our foreign aid budget that goes and digs people out of the rubble, or pulls their bodies out of the sea, or sets up refugee camps, sends food, that kind of thing. I have never met anybody in my 20-odd years of being a journalist, of talking to people who don't like foreign aid, who has ever said, yeah, if the rubble falls on them, let's leave them there, right? So that's part of your foreign aid, number one. Let's all agree pulling people out of rubble is a good thing, especially little babies and dogs and stuff like that, right? Rubble. The second bit is for development. And that's the thing that people often pick holes in, because that's where you get funding that goes through all kinds of different charities and organisations. And it sometimes goes to things that you don't like the sound of, like rockets in India or Ethiopian Spice Girls or whatever it might be. But the reason for that is it buys us favours, right? This is government money. The government isn't giving. They give to a charity, and the charity then goes and spends it in the right place. Sometimes the government gives the money directly, but we're buying influence and power. We're buying favours. We're buying other things. There is a selfish purpose to foreign aid. You're not just giving cash to little brown people, whatever it is that you're worried about, Deb, right? And as Jason has just said there, children starving, poverty, schools, all things that are good frankly. There are lots of things we can argue about, that foreign aid isn't spent very wisely, but I think we can probably agree that it's generally for the best, to be honest, and it is only a tiny proportion, less than 1% of our GDP. And as we make less money, we spend less on foreign aid. So, it's fine, it comes out in the wash.
And just to add to that, what Susie said brilliantly there, Deb, is actually these things come back to our doorstep in the end. So if you don't spend money on foreign aid, you find that these countries become more unstable, which leads to terrorism, which leads to conflict, and it leads to migration. And the migration ends up people coming to our country. And if we can improve their countries and make them more stable, it's better for us as well as it is for them. So there's a reason why we do this. It's not just kind of, if you think the charity begins at home argument works, it doesn't in the end, because if we want to make our lives better, we need to make their lives better as well.
Exactly. If, say, you're going to give a grant for, £1 million for a schools program or a research unit or something in a country a long way away, then in return, diplomatically, they might, help us out with some military intelligence. They might help us out by agreeing some visa programs or student exchanges. Other stuff goes alongside it. It is not isolated. It's not giving cash away to people. That's not how it works. And sadly, that is how it is sold to a lot of people. Although I don't know about you, Jace, but I've been in places where I've seen the aid come in and I've seen it go out the back again under lock and key and get sold. And some of it is going entirely wrong, and it's just used to prop up corrupt regimes, and I don't like that at all. But generally speaking, the system is for the best, I think. Anyway, there you go. Thanks for popping in, Deb. You're never going to get much of a hearing around here, but we are going to tackle some of the things you say, because there are people in our comments that might believe some of the mad stuff you come out with. But do please keep coming out with it, because I love to know where you are, and I'd be worried if you were quiet. It might mean you were planning something. So we're going to move on now, because there is some good news in all of this. We're worrying about travel, you're worrying about vaccines, you're worrying about when this is all going to be over. We have some good news for you. Here it is. Now, finally, we have discussed a few times on this show the perambulations of Wally the Wandering Walrus. Try saying that with John. Who turned up in Tenby. He caroused his way around Cornwall and was last seen frolicking off the French coast. But we wondered last time if he was going to be heading towards the Med for a bit of sea and sun, and it seems he's been seen basking in the Bay of Biscay. Now, Jason, is this something that we should be happy about? Because at least someone is enjoying foreign travel. Or is it a sign that walruses perhaps are evolving to get around climate change by abandoning the Arctic for the Mediterranean?
Now, there's two big questions here. Yeah. Has he gone there on holiday?
Or is it a working trip?
And if he goes back to the Arctic, if he can get back to the Arctic, when he gets back to the Arctic, will he have to kind of self-isolate on a kind of ice floe for 10 days?
Who knows? I think male walruses do self-isolate naturally anyway.
Really?
He's entirely on his own. I'm not sure who could possibly be picking the virus up from.
Yeah. That would be quite sad, wouldn't it? If all the other walruses were on one sheet of ice and he was made to sit by himself for 10 days on another one. That would be upsetting.
Yeah, it would depend if the walruses really have a virus genomic sequencing program and stuff like that, and they're worried about variants coming in.
Maybe he's been double jabbed. Who knows? Maybe he can go where he wants.
I think if you're a walrus and you've got tusks 6 inches long coming out your mouth, you can go where you like. Yeah, no one's gonna. I just hope he's not completely lost and he does actually manage to get back home at some point, find a nice lady walrus to settle down with, because he's not going to get.
It'd be nice if he came back, because it was nice seeing him in Wales.
Back to Tenby, but do a little loop back again. I think you should go around the other coast this time. Go up the North Sea. Give Norfolk a chance.
You can spot him on your holiday in Whitby.
Maybe he'll be there and I'll wave at him. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? So we've got a few more holiday questions we want to just bring up before we sign off for the day. Now, Clive, morning, Clive. The desperate need for a foreign holiday has been totally blown up by the media. I agree. I was in my 20s before I had any concept of a holiday abroad, but had some great holidays here. Great Britain holiday providers should wake up and make prices cheaper, encouraging many more to discover our wonderful country. I will say one thing about the cheaper prices issue. These people were absolutely wrecked last year. They had no income and they had an awful lot of expense. I've got a friend who's got a little buy-to-let property that she lets out, and she had to pay the mortgage on that the whole time that it wasn't being let, and it's absolutely excruciating rates and everything else. So she really does need to make the money back this year, which I think is fair enough for some of them. And to be honest, Jason, I mean, if everybody was biting your arm off for your, daily politics newsletter, you'd start charging for it, wouldn't you? Not that they're not already biting your arm off for it. It is a free service, and everyone should sign up. And Jean says, we used to go to Blackpool every year for a long weekend. We had a ball every year. All the people we work with, it's from Belfast. Wish we could go there now, but we're in Australia and locked down for the 4th time. Ah, yes, but Jean, I've heard about Australian lockdowns. They're so tough that apparently you have to wear masks sometimes. And that's sort of it. But they've closed the borders, Jason, haven't they? And I was speaking to someone yesterday who has got a relative in Australia, and they're barely bothering with the vaccination program. They're rolling it out really slowly. It's not the kind of rush that we've got in this country to get jabbed, because they've got so little coronavirus in the country that it's not such a big pressure for them. But they have closed the borders. I wonder which Boris Johnson would prefer.
I think Kelly wins with that comment.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. You get to go to Barbados, Kelly.
There are people in Barbados who may be thinking of going on holiday to Blackpool this year.
Will the 21st be the end to lockdown, or is the new variant going to stop it? This is the question we've been struggling with for the last half hour, Shaz. We think it's not going to be the end to lockdown. There is going to be some restrictions going on. What those restrictions are, who knows? But I'm sure Boris Johnson will package it in a way to try and imply he's giving you lots of freedoms back. Is it safe to go to Blackpool?
Are we talking mentally, physically?
Coronavirus-wise?
I've been a few times. I came away unscathed. I think you'll be safe, Wilhelmina.
Yes, you'll be all right. As long as you're not trying to get up in. And they got the deck chairs back, so everything's in. And if Wally comes back, you'll have something to look at as well, which would be fantastic. Right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for all your questions. I think Blackpool won that little holiday off. So don't go to Barbados, everybody. And about 28% of people there have had the first jab. And we shall see you next week for some more, I think on Wednesday, actually, for another edition of the News Agenda. Thank you for joining me, Jason. See you all soon, everybody.